When you got married, you said, I do. Now you're thinking about leaving the marriage and you're saying, I don't. We're going to talk today about some of the things that you want to make sure that you don't do when you're contemplating or going through a divorce. The first thing is, do not take matters into your own hands. And I think Allison and I both, and maybe even you too, as you listen to this, can think of a million stories, or at least a dozen stories of people who did not heed that kind of advice and tried to take things into their own hands, and it just blew up in their face and created so much more damage in the divorce process and in all the relationships that are involved in a divorce process. Allison, I'm sure you have a lot of stories.
Oh, and this is so true. And I'm notorious for it because my clients come from all over the country and actually all over the globe. And so I don't know all the law. I'm not a lawyer. So I'm famous for Googling, what does the law say? Well, guess what? And if you listen to our episode with Greg Bean talking, he's going to hit on this one. Just because the law says this, it's not the way the words are written. It's the way they've been interpreted based on case law and what happens in each state and in each precinct and all the different areas that laws is implemented. And that while we can get out there and we can do our own research and think we know exactly what we're doing and we've got this, we've got him nailed, it doesn't mean that the way you're interpreting those words in that law is exactly the way it's going to be applied. So it's about building a credible and reliable team of people around you that are going to be there to help you interpret what your options are and what is in your best interest.
And that ties into our second tip, or our second on the list of the top 4. And that is, don't go against the court ruling. And like Allison just said, the rules and the laws are often subject to interpretation. When the court rules on something in your particular case, it's now personal. They have interpreted that law and they've made it personal to your situation. So you've got to follow it to the letter of the law, because the last thing you want to do is be in contempt. And that also leads to wreaking more havoc in your final outcome, or even getting to the final outcome.
Yeah, what I hear most from my clients is, we've gotten our temporary parenting plan and he's not living by it, so why should I have to? And that's the wrong way to go about it, because the court is going to look at who adhered to what the court said and what happened. And 99% of the time, if they're not adhering to it and you don't adhere to it, it washes their bad behavior. You just wash their bad behavior away. When if you let them go ahead and do their bad behavior, and I know it's tough, but you adhere to what the court asks you to do, you've given them enough rope to hang themselves. And if they do it often enough, the court will notice the pattern. But if you keep doing the same thing they do, you've washed away the opportunity to have the court turn around and look at what's happened and change that ruling to your favor.
It reminds me of that adage, and I think anybody that grew up in the 60s or 70s, maybe the 80s, would remember this, but my mother used to always say, and my grandmother too, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And so, and that hits on exactly what you just said, Allison. Just because he is misbehaving doesn't mean that you can misbehave and it'll all be okay. You cancel each other out. No, you just showed the court how you behave.
In the divorce, if one person is acting unreliable and irresponsibly and the other person is doing what they're supposed to, the court sees that. They've seen all this before. They've dealt with it all before. And a lot of times they know they've got to put the rope out there and see who swings from it. And so our advice is follow what the court says. That in itself can't be used against you.
That's such a good point. And that's a good phrase I think, to like hold on to and remind yourself of often is like, am I doing anything that the court can hold against me? Forget about what he's doing. You know,
Mhm.
his behavior is his business and he can deal with it with the courts. Worry about your own behavior. And that's what we tell our kids too, right? When they go out into the world, it's like you worry about you. I don't care what the other kids
Mhm.
are doing. I care about what you're doing.
Yep.
So,
Just because somebody else walks down a long pier off the end doesn't mean you need to jump in the water with them. Don't do it.
exactly. Exactly. So the other 2 points today that we want to drive home emphatically, actually, at least I do, is
Hmm.
revolves around the children. And the first one being, do not expose your kids to your animosity if you happen to have animosity. Uh, it hurts your relationship with the kids. It makes them want to defend the other person. And honestly, it's none of their business. It's none of their business how what you've got going on, and it's none of their business what the other spouse has going on. It's y'all's business, not the kids' business. One of the things that I really harped on when I was going through my divorce and my kids were little is that regardless of what my ex-husband was doing, I always reminded myself that he is their father. And even if I got remarried again, he would still be their father and the only biological father they will ever have. And their relationship with him should be between the two of them without me in the middle of it. And I go back to that so many times, here 20 some odd years later, but uh, of all the decisions that I made, some of them were not good at all. That was, I think, my best decision ever in my divorce.
It was. And I can tell you that I counsel my clients all the time. You know, your children are your children, and you're raising them for those 18 years, maybe 22 if they go to college when you're raising them. They have a whole lot of life left ahead of them, more life left ahead of them post your divorce and post them growing up than they ever will have during this time frame. And there's this misconception that there are two parents and one child, and the child has to choose between the two. And when either of you takes that stand, you have just done damage to your children, because as children, they want to have both their parents. And typically, it'll be the weaker of the two parents that will force them into making a choice between the two. Don't let it be you, because in the end, that hurts your children, and they see you in a different light, because you're asking them to choose between their mother and their father, and we only each get one. And as Elizabeth said, that is going to be their parent for the rest of their life. Look at this from the long haul. Hold your head up high. Know that your children love you. Even if they're acting out, they're going through some hell right now too. And they are going to act out. But know that when this divorce is over, the most important thing is for them to know they're safe with you, and they don't have to ward off your anger attacks and venting about what their father did. That puts them in an awful position that they do not want to be in.
I agree. And one of the things I used to think about too when I was in that season of life is, if he's a jerk and I think he's a jerk, my kids will figure it out. When they grow
Mm-hmm.
up, if he stays a jerk, at some point in time, my kids will be old enough to figure it out and they'll say, he's a jerk. I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to tell them. I don't need to prove it to them. And it does create so much discord and so much anxiety for kids. It's unnecessary.
And I've had children of clients going, I don't know who's telling me the truth. I just need to know who's telling me the truth. And unfortunately, the child didn't know, because both parents were beating each other up in front of the children. And the most important thing is just to remember, you will have your relationship with your children for the rest of their lives. don't do something now that will damage it, that you'll have to rebuild.
Yeah, that's good advice. And this animosity thing ties in also to the fourth and last point today, which is don't confide in your kids. Like I said a minute ago, this divorce, just like the marriage, is between you and your spouse. It's not between the kids are not party to this. They're not getting divorced. You are with your ex-husband or husband. And I have a client right now who has grown children, and she's confiding in her grown daughter. And she was telling me a story the other day, and as she was telling me the story, I could mentally visualize this. And they're both on the phone, and they're going and they're feeding off of each other. And what was happening was the mom was working the daughter up. And so now the daughter's getting more and more upset and angry at the dad. So then she starts giving her piece back to mom. Now mom's getting more upset, and it just escalates everything. And in the end, it's not the kid's business.
And more importantly, when you're in the middle of a divorce, the minute you say it and it comes out of your mouth, it's on record. And you don't know what is going on behind the scenes. You don't know the pressure that's being put on your children to repeat everything you say and you do. And anybody that's ever been a parent knows that most kids, by the time they're 3 years old, knows how to play one parent against the other. And particularly if your children are teenagers, and right now you're the favored parent, who's to say who you're going to be next week? And now that you've confided all of these things into your children, and you just become the out of favor parent next week because you didn't buy them those shoes or get their hair cut or whatever it was they wanted, they're going to open their mouth and it's going to spill all out to your soon to be ex-husband. And that puts your children in a horrible position, not only later in life to realize the damage that they did to you in that process, but also the damage they did to themselves and their relationship with you and their father.
I think at the end of the day, we just have to remember that we're the parent and they're the child, regardless of what their age is. We're the parent, they're the child.
Got two here that are related to your children, which is one of the things that's the core of who we are, and trying to protect them through this divorce. And for that reason, really listen to those. And the other two are about the logistical, the legal matters in your divorce. The other side of that divorce that wrenches us trying to figure it out. If you're clean in both of those areas, you are always going to come out in a much better position at the end of it all. And once the divorce is done, things will get back to a new normal, different than the old. And sometimes it can be much better.
If you missed the episode before this, where we talk about the do's that you want to adhere to when going through a divorce, be sure to check that out. Be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, ring the bell, and follow us for more information in the days and weeks ahead.